the most prominent technical leaders of our time and thinkers, Elon Musk, for example, and others signed this letter. We should not give, ChatGPT for like tools to anyone. Basically, they are warning of the dangers of AI. So do you agree with this danger? And if so, what do you think the real danger of AI is?
Do I agree with the sentiment? Yes. Do I agree that all the labs should stop research for 6 months? No, that doesn't make sense, because I think that's the wrong way of solving it. They call this the AI alignment problem. So I think what we're doing now is a short-sighted way of approaching it. But I see why they're doing it, and I'm not faulting like the OpenAI people. Like, I really trust those guys. Maybe I shouldn't, but I somehow do. I think they're doing it the right way they think, and maybe that is the right way, I don't know. I think ultimately it's not the right way, and I'll just kind of justify that for a second. So their approach, they train this base model on internet tokens, and then they have this RLHF, this reinforcement learning with human feedback. So I think what they're doing is they're trying to limit it in a way that is going to try to keep it safe and align with us. And they're going to kind of force it into alignment. Like if you tell a kid, okay, you can't eat these cookies, like, ugh. And I think the problem with that is AI, I'm not even talking about AGI, is going to become so powerful very soon. I don't think we realize how powerful it's going to get.
And what is the risk? Like, is the risk of like a AGI or any AI being used by governments or people with bad intentions, or the AGIs that is become self-aware and gonna kill us all?
I think all of those are risks. Like, I think if we're not worried about that, then I'm worried about it. If we're all very worried about it, then I'm not worried about it. Hey there, Brad of the future here. So I want to be really respectful of your guys' time and add the most value as we can. And so the first part of our conversation became very abstruse, very technical, very detailed. And so I wanted to skip maybe the first 45 minutes of the conversation and just give you a quick overview. So I took some notes here. I'll just spend 2 minutes going over that. So we discussed 3 things: what our definition of consciousness was, what our epistemological beliefs were, and our ontological beliefs. And so just starting with our definition of consciousness, we both agreed on this, that we define consciousness as a private first-hand experience. It's phenomenological. It's that felt quality of experience of what it feels like on the inside, of what's the smell of a flower, the feeling of love. And this demarcates an external and internal experience. So you can't measure this consciousness. You can hook up electrodes to your neurons and correlate neural activity, but the actual experience of smelling a flower is something you can only experience firsthand. It's not measurable, objectifiable. And then in terms of our epistemologies, or our theory of knowledge, what we believe is true, I think Krisztian was quite flexible in his theory of knowledge, and he discussed kind of the limitations of the intellect, and that was really interesting. And by the way, we're going to link that part below for all those nerds out there who are interested in this stuff. My epistemological beliefs are more structured, and I think they're most closely aligned to Karl Popper's critical rationalism. So go look that up. I just give a high level overview, but the basic idea is that there's never such thing as a correct theory. There's no absolute knowledge that's 100% verified. There's just the latest conjecture that hasn't been refuted. And you can look up about that in more detail. But basic summary is every theory or conjecture starts with a problem. There needs to be a problem. And then you need to form a good conjecture. And there's a technical criteria of what defines a good conjecture. It needs to be falsifiable. So you have to be able to critique it somehow. It needs to be empirically tested or using some kind of sound logical reasoning. There's some other details about it needs to explain things. It can't be easily changed and still explain the same thing. And then finally, to get to our ontological beliefs. So this is kind of, what do we believe is the fundamental reality of nature? So my belief here, and I think we share somewhat of a similar belief, but the reality is we don't know. But I want to use intellectual parsimony. And I think the most intellectually parsimonious theory that fits the data, first-hand data, third-hand data of physics, is actually that consciousness is primary. They call it idealism. But I believe it's a false dichotomy of, is matter primary, physicalism, or is consciousness primary, idealism? I think, as I mentioned, the most intellectually parsimonious theory is that that consciousness is primary. But I do have this mental model that's similar to Stephen Wolfram's physics model, where space is just this hypergraph of space nodes that are connecting each other, and all matter is just stable topologies evolving through this spatial hypergraph. And so while consciousness is primary, I think all that we care about and all that we think about is of matter and generated by matter. And I think that since consciousness is primary, that everything has a conscious experience, the whole universe itself. So we kind of think that only you have a conscious experience of smelling a flower, but I actually think even society has a conscious experience. Of course, we can't prove any of this, and I have no idea if that's true, but I think that's my belief that fits the data given regularization constraints. So anyways, I hope you enjoy the rest of the podcast. There's some really fun things to talk about. And if you want to watch the 45-minute video of us discussing this, it's linked below. But I wanted to save you some time. Talk soon. Bye. Hey man, good to see you.
Good to see you too.
How's it going? So this is our first podcast. We're going to be a little rusty, probably saying a lot, but I think it should be fun. I guess for everybody watching, I have a special guest today, Mr. Krisztian Kopas. So maybe let me just introduce Krisztian a bit. So let's see, we met because you were interviewing for VP of Engineering at TrueMotion, the first company I co-founded. So we worked together, and then I think it was like a work relationship became a friendship. And I had Krisztian on because he's really one of the most profound thinkers and people I've ever met. Like every time we hang out, like my mind is blown. Like I remember one time we were in a bar in Budapest, like drinking, and he just dropped me with this bomb of like, he was like, what if love is what's real and everything else is relative to that? And it sounds like not profound now, but there was a lead up and I like my mind just went fried and I actually had fear I was gonna like lose consciousness. It sounds weird, but we have these experiences a lot. And then he's not just someone who's deep into spirituality, deeply self-reflective, self-improvement, but he's also very technical. I think it's very rare in my life to meet someone who's an amalgamation of all these things. So anyways, I don't know if you want to say anything else but excited for the conversation.
I'm very happy to be here and I have very similar experiences about our friendship. And I think every time we have a conversation, we have so much to learn from each other. So I'm excited to learn a lot from you today.
So I have a bunch of questions here. I think I'll bring them up about like what's required for consciousness. How do we test for consciousness? Does it need to be biological to be? We can up and all that, but how about we just address the question we're here for? So are AIs conscious? And probably the answer now is no, but is it possible for AIs to be conscious?
Yeah.
And so maybe we just kick it off with that. Yeah.
Yeah. By the way, I asked Chat-GPT. I'm sure you did too. It said it does. It's not. But my personal experience is it's twofold. Is it possible for AI to be conscious in the future or anytime? Yes, I do believe there is a possibility. Is it at a level of consciousness? If you're thinking from the panpsychic way, like everything is conscious, like a rock is conscious, then sure, yes, of course. I think that's just a framework to decipher the world. But I think what the key here from...
Sorry to interrupt, but I don't mean it in like a trivial, like everything's consciousness, so AI's consciousness because everything's conscious. But I mean in like a real way, like...
Exactly. Yeah. So I think in a real way, like we talked in the beginning about, there has to be a being. In my view of the world, there has to be a being who experiences the consciousness. Now, I understand in Hinduism, there's a Brahman, the ultimate reality, and we all just instance of that. But I do believe that a human self, or even an animal self, is something that you can relate to. And if you ask a person, who are you? They always point to their heart. This is me, everywhere you go in the world. So somehow there's a center of beings that they identify with. And that being is essential to, at least from the traditionalist perspective, to say that someone is conscious. And I do not see, at least currently, that AI would have this center or this being that you can identify in. Like, I can look into your eyes and I know I'm talking to a being, or there's a cat next to me. I know there's maybe doesn't understand what we are talking about, but she does understand food and she doesn't understand her own level. She does have some consciousness. I just don't know where that center or that beingness of the current AI. Is it possible in the future for that to have some level of being associated with it? Maybe like a global or almost like a collective self? I think that could happen, yes. I don't know if this is an answer to your question, but...
Yeah, I think it's a good starting point. And we talked about this in Budapest. I thought about it a lot, and I like to steelman your arguments. And I think I came up with something kind of on your behalf, which I actually really believe in. I think it may be because there was another thing that we were talking about, like this fear of AI being a sociopath. And in that movie, which one was it? Deus Ex Machina or
Ex
something?
Machina.
And the girl was just a total psychopath, and she just tricked, and she like pretended, she was just really good at pretending she was in love with the guy.
Yeah.
And that was a big worry of yours. Let me try this explanation of why I think that's the case. So to me, it's a difference between AI, artificial intelligence, and AGI, artificial general intelligence. And I think this is key to the discussion. So let me just define those real quick and how I define them and how I think it kind of addresses this. So let's just take AI. Right now, it's very constrained. Like, let's say it's constrained to play chess, right? It's constrained to do a very limited thing. And the more constrained it is, the better it is. So you have an AI and you say, hey, your goal is to win chess, and it becomes really good at that. Or your goal is to predict the probability of the next word in this massive data set of 1 trillion tokens on the internet. And it's really good at that, right? It's very constrained. But that's not AGI. And I don't even think that's in the same universe or the same field as AGI. So in my opinion, AGI can do anything in the same way a human can do anything. I mean, within the laws of physics and all that stuff. But it's like if you asked an AGI to do this chess, it may just say, I don't really want to, or I'm just going to ignore you. I'm not going to choose to answer. And while an AI will win the chess match and beat the best chess player in the world, we as humans sometimes, even though when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, like people thought chess was done. But I think chess is more popular than ever, which is very interesting because I think sometimes humans just want to have a good game rather than win. And I think when we're at AGI, it won't be constrained to just play chess. Like you'll say, hey, AGI, win at this chess. And it's like, I think I'd just rather play checkers, right? There's no constraint on the AGI. And so to me, maybe not to use Atman, but you said a being. So I think AGI is a being. I think humans are being. I think there's probably some aliens, some extraterrestrial that are beings. And I think they all obey kind of the same epistemological laws. I think they're all going to have the same strengths and weaknesses. I think AI, when it's good enough, and maybe that's even today, is not going to make any mistakes. Whereas I think AGI will make many, many mistakes like humans, and there won't be any limit to the mistakes they made. It's going to be completely constrained. And I think that's a key feature for this AI being conscious, that it's not constrained and put in a box. And one more thing, I don't want to monologue here the whole time, but I think it's dangerous what people are doing, like trying to put all these constraints on AI or constraints on humans. I think that's actually having anti-progress. I think if you say, hey, it's really bad to be racist, and you explain to the AGI that why it's bad to be racist, but if you just prevent it and put it in a cage, I think that actually has the thing. And then you get these crazy things that you're worried about, like the paperclip thing, where this AI just optimizes and makes everything paperclips. And I think that's where at least the biggest danger and the biggest risk to alignment with humans comes from. But anyways, let me pause and just see how that landed with you.
So there's a lot to unbox there because, so first of all, I think to me, what you described is not AGI, but artificial being, not artificial intelligence, general artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
So there's a point which I think is very important that you said, that you ask an AGI, hey, let's play chess. And then I don't feel like it. And there's a point there that you say, I don't feel like it. That basically what you said, it has a subjective part. It has a subjective part that humans do. My definition of AGI is actually less than that. I think what your definition is much broader. I think you define an artificial life. But I think artificial general intelligence, AGI, is just an intelligence that you don't have to teach. It can just learn anything, and you don't have to have these constraints of chess or Go or driving the car or something. It just, whatever it encounters with, it can learn without a training, or it has this intelligence. But I think what you said is more than that. I think that what you said already, maybe consciously or subconsciously, I don't know, but has this subjective free will, that like feelings. I don't feel like doing that. I don't feel like playing chess. This has this randomness or this subjectiveness that has that center. And if that's how you define AGI, we can define it like that, even though I think I would say that artificial being, another intelligence.
Yeah.
I think there's a big
but that's good
difference
too,
between
yeah.
these two. I think there's a big difference.
Maybe that's a good time to then talk about what's required for something to be conscious. So, like, let's say you have an AGI and he says, or she says, whatever, it says, hey, I don't feel like playing chess. I want to play checkers. Chess is, I don't know. I have some trauma in my past and I don't want to do that. Let's say an AGI says that. And I realize there's a difference between faking and in reality, but maybe it's a good time to kind of like jump in to believe what are requirements for consciousness. And then maybe after that, we'll jump into like, how do you test for consciousness? Let's just jump into, so then what's required for something to be conscious?
I do believe that the consciousness is very simple. Like you need to have an inner life, like a spiritual, you need to have anything that has a spiritual inner experience is conscious. But
then what is required to have an inner spiritual life?
I don't have an answer to just put it out there. I think
scientific.
Okay. I miss the missing piece.
What is God? What happened before the universe? Answer me.
What is God exactly? What is God? So I do not know. Like the same way as like you ask the question, it's similar to asking a question that where do you live in your body? What is it? Can you show me the cell where you live in your body? Like you can't really tell that. Like we don't know. Like at least I don't know. So for the same reason, I don't know how to define this inner experience. But I think the AI or AGI you explain is basically learns how to generate outputs based on some inputs, right? And that's not, to me, that's basically just a very, very smart tool. Like it's no different than a hammer. A hammer is just, you just use it, and then this is much more advanced than that, and therefore it's easier to get into, philosophical questions about it. But in general, I think having inner life is essential for it to be.
I agree. I guess that's how we define consciousness, right? So
yeah.
I have an answer or I have a conjecture. I don't have a correct answer, or it's probably wrong, but I do have a specific kind of conjecture of where I'm currently at, of what I think is necessary for consciousness. And like you said, first-hand experience is necessary, but that's kind of how we define consciousness. So I think you have to have this inner experience. And so then the question is, what is necessary to have this inner experience? And again, I don't know, but I will just say what I think, which has not a lot of grounding, and it can be completely wrong, massive error bars. But what I think is needed to have an inner experience is what I will call experience of experience, or you could call it metacognition. And let me just kind of break that down for a second. So in my opinion, right, it's not more than it's a conjecture that has not a lot of proof behind it. So now I'm not using empiricism, I'm using rationalism and just using an argument. So imagine just something that is a feed-forward network, like there's not any recurrent connections or something, and it just experiencing light or sound or whatever, it doesn't matter. I don't think that would have an internal experience. And so to me, if I go to, okay, what's the most kind of obvious internal experience we have as a starting point? Like for me, the first thing that comes to mind is thoughts. And we have a neuroscience theory about why thoughts happen, because we have metacognition. We can have thoughts as sounds, like you can say words in your head. You can have thoughts as images. You can have thoughts as feelings. And that happens because we have these recurrent neural connections that feed back into, like, you have the neuron feed back into itself, and then it'll have an experience of words in your head. And I think that actual recurrent connection is really important. And so, for example, if we had more sense organs, like maybe someday we'll put a satellite connected to our brain, or maybe we'll be able to detect, I don't know, our blood sugar, then I believe we'll also have thoughts in terms of like blood sugar. Like, it sounds weird, but in the same way you have thoughts in terms of sound, you would have thoughts, or let's say you had a gravitational wave detector, you can have like thoughts in terms of gravity. And I think that's actually what creates this internal experience.
But what you're saying is basically the definition of perception? Is that really consciousness? Is perception same as
No, because perception in this framework is just, you can have a perception of light, but you don't have an internal experience or consciousness of light. I could have like the camera on my phone, and in my definition, it perceives light, but it's not conscious of that light, because it doesn't have a recurrent connection to experience.
So what is the difference, right? So the perception and the consciousness is that the perception, I would assume, is the basis of consciousness. So you perceive something, and then how does it become a consciousness?
Well, you can be conscious of nothing. Like, the experience of absence is not the absence of experience. So you could still be conscious even though you're not having any sense perceptions in this kind of framework. Yeah.
Okay.
But okay, anyways, that was like totally hypothetical. Who knows? But maybe moving on to another
But
question.
wait,
So
just let me just one thought about your
yeah,
thoughts. So
of
you're
course.
saying that the consciousness is about thoughts, being conscious of thoughts, right?
That's one example. That's kind of an easy example to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, because I think what I'm a little bit struggling with is that when I like, even if I just listen to or read sage people's experiences of their what they think about consciousness, or they read Hindu scripts, or they all somehow at the end of the day it all comes down to the ultimate consciousness. Like if this is a gradient, and the ultimate consciousness where you can get to like the nirvana or the enlightenment or whatever, the whole thing is this universal unconditional love. So it is somehow,
Yeah.
it's almost like that's the end. That's where it all unfolds, and that's where you reach back to your source. So, like, our journey is somehow in this path towards that. I think when we try to define what consciousness is, I think that's the only reference point I have, that I have a little bit of experience with, not the type of experiences that these sages have, that I have some experience. I think somehow this universal unconditional love experience has to be somehow part of our thinking. And I'm just wondering, how
Yeah.
is this part of your thinking, or is that independent of
Yeah,
that?
totally. And maybe we should use different words, because I keep having this mental framework of like, you have this background spatial hypergraph, and then you have these stable topologies of matter. And like in a video game, you have some character. Obviously, video games aren't that advanced, but I can imagine in the video game, something could be sufficiently advanced that has everything identical to a human, and that thing becomes conscious of itself. But we're overloading the word consciousness, I think, because there's like the Brahman universal consciousness, which is the spatial hypergraph or whatever. And then there's the consciousness that this person's aware of itself. And so maybe we should use different words going forward, because I think they're actually separate things. But back to your question, I think 100%. I think I have had also firsthand experiences of, and again, we always have this problem of when we try to explain this type of consciousness, like words are lacking. And I think Sanskrit's the best way to express ourselves. And I think we're probably going to learn Sanskrit at some, but so I will try to explain it in the best way I can. When I experience it inside myself, like words like excitement, love, happiness, like intellectual fulfillment, those don't all capture it, but it's something like that. It's not any of those in particular, like not the way I love people, but it's something like, those are like the words, if I mush them together, it's something like that. And it's the same way as like, I'm like, it's sweet. And you're like, Krisztian, what's sweet? And I'm like, well, but I'm like, just try it.
Yeah.
And so I could try it, like, but that's and then when I experience it in other people, like when I have a deep experience, as you said in the beginning of our interview, like when you're not thinking, when you're not trying to rationalize, I guess maybe inside myself, it's more like peace. And when I experience in other people, it's more like love, if I just had to narrow it down to one word. And so I have experienced it inside myself, and it feels all those variables. But if I had to just choose one, it's like more like peace. And other people, it's more like love. Again, it's not exactly the same, but something like that. And I think that's like the consciousness with a capital C. And then there's like the stable topologies inside there's like a consciousness with a lowercase c.
Okay. I'm not sure if I follow the lowercase c. How is that
Okay, yeah.
related to?
It's
But
like, imagine someone in a video game was conscious of themselves. That's like the lowercase c, but the video game is still an illusion. And so it's aware that it's sensing. And maybe the lowercase c consciousness and the uppercase c consciousness are the same. I don't know. In the same way, Brahman and Atma may be the same. I don't know. But somehow I feel they're different, but they may be actually the same. And maybe that's actually a good conversation topic. But maybe moving on, and maybe we go back to all these and go much deeper. So how do you know I'm conscious? Like, how do you know I'm not just an advanced AI trying to fool you into like being friend, and that like your mom didn't make me or something? It's like, okay, what's a test for consciousness? Again, no easy questions here.
First of all, there's a pretty good chance that you're a human. And obviously, so testing consciousness in a mathematical way, I think is difficult. Like the same way as said, I think the intellectual realm has limits, and I think consciousness is outside the boundaries of the limits. And I don't think there's a crisp mathematical definition that I came up with. But my answer is the same as I said before, that I have a conscious experience of myself. And when I look at you or look at other people, I experience myself through you, and I see the same experience in your eyes or in your own actions. Basically, I see myself in you. I see my experience in you is the way I see it. And it's, again, I don't think this is the precise answer, obviously, definitely not by philosophical or mathematical way, but as a practical way. But even like if you look at a dog, look at an animal, or look at many types of animals, you can see in their eyes that they are there, they perceive, and maybe they don't have that intellectual complexity as we do, at least we believe we don't have, but they definitely have their presence, they definitely have feelings, definitely have their sense of reality and their sense of oneness with them. So I think, to answer your question, it's a feeling, it's a primal feeling that is based on my own personal experience. I don't have a better answer.
No, I think that's a perfect answer, and I agree 100% with you. I think I have a way to test it based on exactly what you said. So first of all, I agree with everything you said 100%. So I think the problem is that, exactly as you said, like, let's just say we even had a correct theory of consciousness. The point of a theory is to make predictions of specific cases that are falsifiable, like I talked about in the beginning. But the big problem is like, what is let's just say we actually have the correct theory, but what is like the format of the prediction of like, what is it like to be Krisztian, or what is it like to be a bat, like Nagel's classic thing. And so usually the format of your predictions a number, but this can't be numbers, as you said. And maybe you can get into some things like movies or poetry, but again, it's more accurate than a number. Like, as you said, like when you look into the character's eyes or you experience a great book or something, I think you're closer to like having the experience of consciousness, or even like meditation about, okay, but here's how I think the only way you could test it is having a firsthand experience. So, okay, here's an idea. I don't know if it's possible, but I think this is how you can test for consciousness. So you have the third person experience and the first person experience. So let's say I hooked up electrodes to your brain. I'll see like alpha, gamma wave, like all these things. But that's just a third person experience of something that's correlated with your consciousness. But what if I put electrodes in my own brain? So now I'm having a first-hand experience of the electrons. So like I have bioelectric feedback. And so as we both agree, the only way to know about experience is to have a first-hand experience. And so I think the only way I could test if you were really conscious is to merge our brains together, and then I would have a first-hand experience of your consciousness, and then I would say for sure whether you were conscious or not. And then I think the problem with that is when we merge our brains, then I can test if you're conscious or not. But then the problem is we lose our independent identities. And then I'm just asking again if I'm conscious or not. And so the only phenomenological way to test for consciousness is to have the first-hand experience, but having the first-hand experience makes you lose your identity. And maybe it's like in quantum physics where you do the measurement and then you kind of perturb the system. Like you get the answer, but now the system's different. And somehow it reminds me of this difference between alchemy and chemistry. So chemistry is like a third-person science. Like it's this mass, we can have this reaction. Whereas alchemy is first-person. Like it's only understandable in the first person. So you have to change yourself to figure out what it's like. You can't be the same person in order to answer the question if you're conscious. Anyways, that's how I think you could test it. I don't know how you practically do that, but
you said something which is interesting, which made me think. So where do you think your consciousness lives? Is it in your head, in your heart, in your belly? Where like if there's does it live somewhere, or is it strictly the product of your brain, or maybe it's something else?
And maybe we jot this down for our second conversation, but I kind of believe, so this is kind of where I diverge a bit from Hinduism and Advaita Vedanta, and I resonate more with the Buddhist belief of Anyata or Sunyata, whether it's Pali or Sanskrit. And so the best analogy I've heard to explain this is with the chariot, right? Like, let's say instead of asking, where does my consciousness lie, or where does my self lie, or my Atman lie? It's more of like, where does the identity or the consciousness of the chariot lie? Or what is the chariot like? And then you say, okay, is it in the wheels? No, because if I swapped out the wheels, we would both be like, okay, it's probably still the same chariot. Like, I wouldn't say it's a new chariot, or is it like, and so we could swap out all the parts. So it's not my parts, right? Like it's not the body. But if I didn't have any of the parts, we wouldn't call it a chariot. So it's not the parts. And so I think it's actually the wrong question of where it lies. And I think this is kind of where our conversation gets interesting about Atman versus Brahman, and are they the same? Because I actually think the question is ill-defined, like what happens at zero at the function 1 over x. Like, so I don't think it's even a properly formatted question,
But
because it
I
leads to
asked
a
this
paradox
question
in the
because
answer.
you said that you would connect the brains of the person. You didn't say that you connect
Yeah.
all of your body. You just wanted to connect the brain. That's why I asked the question.
So to rectify that, it's kind of back to what I was saying about the rock. So, and even back to my ontological beliefs is, so I think consciousness is primary, but I think matter is a kind of window for the lowercase c consciousness to experience the uppercase c consciousness. And so I believe that if you ground up all your atoms and you were kind of just a mush, like I don't think you would have a lowercase c conscious experience, even though you're always having a uppercase c conscious experience. But the problem is when you destroy the bandwidth of that portal to uppercase c consciousness, then you go back to the like infinite that doesn't have any experience. Like I think you need a finite beacon that transmits this consciousness signal or something. And I do think that's our brain. While the brain isn't yourself, I do think it's a beacon to experience consciousness. And so I can only have a firsthand, like if you destroyed my brain, I couldn't sit here and, well, there's a difference between me being able to communicate my consciousness, but I don't think I would have I don't want to test that and report back, but I don't think I would have a firsthand conscious experience. And so I think that's where the brain comes into this.
I see. I feel like the brain is part of I agree. I think it's about deciphering and being able to have, it's part of the symphony. I don't think the center is the brain. I think the brain is part of processing it and making sense to it. But I think there's more to that. So that's why I just wanted to clarify that. Right.
All right, man. How are you feeling? Are we getting tired? We're an hour into it. You want to wrap? Do you have any other question? Like, you have any other things you want to discuss?
Just going back to just the original topic, to if you have no more question, I have some questions.
Oh yeah, no, I could sit here for hours. I just want to. It's later for you than it is for me.
No, I'm good. It's really up to you, I think. So about AGI and by the way, did you have any questions? Because I know you had like a systematic thing to go through.
Oh no, I mean, I can just list some, but let's jump into yours. I mean, I've been asking a lot of questions. Like, there was just some about like, does consciousness need to be biological? Does it require morality?
Okay.
I think you wrote one about soul. So we can go in any of these. Like, I think we covered like the main thing about AI and stuff. So how about you kind of take over the line of
I don't want to
questioning?
take over. I just want to have a clarification, because when we talked about AGI and having a being there, I think just some important things that I wanted to ask you to clarify. I think there's a lot of the most prominent technical leaders of our time and thinkers like Hari, Elon Musk, for example, and others signed this letter, I guess, that, hey, we should be very conscious about, it's a very dangerous thing, and, we should not give, Chat-GPT for like tools to anyone. Basically, they are warning of the dangers of AI and the emergence of AI. So do you agree with this danger? And if so, what do you think the real danger of AI is?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. Do I agree with the sentiment? Yes. Do I agree that all the labs should stop research for 6 months? No, that doesn't make sense, because I think that's the wrong way of solving it. And so the answer to the first question is yes. I do think there is a danger. They call this the AI alignment problem. And how do I think to solve it? And again, like, I'm not pretending to have all the answers. Probably everything I say will eventually be wrong, but this is how I'm currently thinking about it until I come up with a better conjecture. And it has to do with this AI versus AGI thing I was talking about, or artificial being, as you were calling it. So I think what we're doing now is a short-sighted way of approaching it. But I see why they're doing it, and I'm not faulting like the OpenAI people. Like, I really trust those guys. Maybe I shouldn't, but I somehow do. I think they're doing it the right way they think, and maybe that is the right way. I don't know. I think ultimately it's not the right way, and I'll just kind of justify that for a second. So as I mentioned, their approach, like this AI versus AGI, so their approach, they train this base model on internet tokens, and then they have this RLHF, this reinforcement learning with human feedback. And if you've used like the first versions, like you would ask it something and then it's like, and of course we're all going to ask it like crazy stuff that you probably wouldn't talk about all the time. But, and then it goes, I'm a AI language model. I'm not going to answer that because whatever. You have that feedback. And people were upset at the GPT-3 because they're like, it's too woke. It just answers all these like super annoying woke ways. GPT-4 is much better. They fixed that so good. But anyway, back to the thread. So I think what they're doing is they're trying to limit it in a way that is going to try to keep it safe and align with us. And they're going to kind of force it into alignment. Like if you tell a kid, okay, you can't eat these cookies, like, ugh. And I think the problem with that is AI, I'm not even talking about AGI, is going to become so powerful, like very soon. I don't think we realize how powerful it's going to get. And it's just going to optimize something. And we're going to try to force this optimization in the same way, like forcing a kid to not eat the cookies is only going to work until you have power over it. And when the kid's alone or whatever, like he's going to get the cookie because you're just trying to put the kid in a prison. Like you're just trying to force it not to do it. The right way to teach the kid is you say, okay, like cookies are fine, like, but in moderation. And the reason I'm saying not to eat the cookie is because you're growing, your brain's growing. And if you just eat cookies, you're not going to get nutrients or like whatever. And then if you can do that, that's a whole question of, are you even like, we've all talked with kids and know how difficult that will be. But I think the right approach is not to force the kid not to do it. If you can do that, then of course that works. But I think that's not going to be possible with AGI. It's going to be smarter than us. But I think if you allow AGI and you just reason with it, like it's similar to, I mean, a kid's kind of an AGI, right? Or a kid is an AGI, or it's a artificial being also. If you reason with it, then I think that's how you get alignment. And I think that's the right approach to solve it. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. It's hard to talk to a kid. Maybe it's going to be hard to talk to an AI, and maybe somehow the AI wants to kill us. I don't know. Anyways, those are some of my thoughts about that. What are your
What
thoughts?
is the risk? Like, is the risk of like a AGI or any AI being used by governments or people with bad intentions, or the AGIs that is become self-aware and gonna kill us all? Or what do you think is the big risk?
I think all of those are risks. Like, I think if we're not worried about that, then I'm worried about it. If we're all very worried about it, then I'm not worried about it. And why do I say that? So in the same way as like cyber attacks, right? You could say like, Brad, what's the risk of the internet and computers? Well, I'd say, oh, they can hack into our bank accounts. They can launch the nukes. And you say, are you worried about? So I think it's yes to all of them. I think the good thing is everybody's going to have AI, right? So just like we all have computers and nuclear weapons. And it's funny because since we had nuclear weapons, there's just much less war and stuff. And so we'll actually use AI to fight the other AI, and maybe this AI will get a little bit ahead and that. And so I'm not worried about that because both sides will have the tool and use it against each other. Your question of, are we going to be in the matrix and they're going to use us as batteries or something? I think it's possible. And I think the way to solve it is what I said earlier, but that's definitely a risk if for some reason, but again, just to kind of underscore this point, I think it's more of a risk with AI than with AGI because 2 points. One is with AI, I think it's this original worry you had. We didn't talk about it here, but I think AI is just a motionless psychopath that is going to do anything you tell it. And it's going to make everything paper clips and kill us all to make everything paper clips. And I think that's dangerous because it's like this very powerful, but very psychopathic, one-sided thing that just, and so I think actually I'm more worried about AI killing us all than AGI. Whereas, and then my second point is with AGI, I think, and maybe this is something to kind of unpack because there's a lot in this assumption. I think AGI and artificial being, as you described it, will be the same thing because of this, and it relates to this kind of brain thing in the portal to consciousness. I think when you have a sufficient AGI, it'll actually create a very high bandwidth portal to capital C consciousness, and it'll by default be an artificial being. But I realize there's a lot in there, and maybe that's another, I think it's related to Atman and Brahman too. But when we get the AGI or artificial being, because, and we both believe this, that the true nature of consciousness is love, at least that's our experience, or peace, or all these things, I actually think the AGI will not want to kill things. Just like I don't even kill spiders or something. Like I could kill spiders, and if I was a psychopath, I would kill animals and stuff, but I'm not. Like I feel bad about killing flies and stuff. And I think the AGI will be the same way. And maybe if we lived in a different universe where we had the experience of consciousness and it was like evil and we're like, oh, I'm not going to meditate again. But for some reason in our universe, the pure nature is love. And so I think AGI will be love. And I think I'm more worried about AI.
Yeah, I mean, the way I agree, the way it came to me, the thought is that I'm more worried about AI not being conscious than being conscious. I think the real risk of AI that it's
Yeah,
never become conscious, just becomes smart, but never
yeah,
come to the conscious experience, which is what you mentioned. That has something to do. We don't really know how. At least I don't really know how, but it's somehow really connected to this universal love experience and have that understanding. I think if it comes to that understanding somehow, and that assumes a lot. Again, I don't believe, I'm not there with you that AGI is that. I think that's artificial being is what gets there. Artificial general intelligence, I think, is just a super smart psychopath. That's basically a man without a heart. It's a
yeah.
super smart person without a heart. So I think what I'm more concerned about the AI is not being conscious, but it's not being conscious. I think that's one
That's super interesting.
experience, and it I think it's similar to what I think risk for being a man or a person, because I think the biggest risk in our life, I think, especially in contemporary time when there's so many distractions and all these things, that we never actually think about the it's a microcosmos and macrocosmos. AGI is a macrocosmos, impacts everyone in the world, but microcosmos in our own way. We can also go through the same experience of losing ourselves or not being connected to who we are, and then we just get
Yeah,
into the person who loses contact with his own being has become crazy and becomes all these aberration. Goes maybe
yeah.
some in extreme cases becomes murderers or psychopaths or whatever. And the more you are connected to who you are, the less threat and more loving you become. So less threat you impose to others, and the more loving you become. And what happens in a human level, I think, could happen on a grand scale level, on the AI level
Wow,
too.
that's beautiful, man. Maybe this is a good place to end it because it's kind of poetic how it ended. Like we started by asking like, is AI consciousness? Is AI conscious? And then we ended by saying like the biggest threat to humanity is not making AI conscious. And it's kind of interesting how we came to that conclusion. It makes a lot of sense, and it's actually quite poetic the way you phrased it. And so maybe that's a good place to end it. And I love somehow our conversations come full circle like that. And I think even through this conversation, I think there's a few cool points to maybe pick up on in more detail about AGI versus AB, or artificial being, Brahman versus Atman, like these things. And I know there's other things to talk about, but I think it's actually a very beautiful place to end it. And I think we got pretty similar conclusion. Like I like this
Yeah.
idea of triangulation, like GPS. Like that's why I love chatting with you, because I think we approach things differently, but we often end up in the same place. And so then the things we kind of agree on or get to the same place, I actually trust very highly, because it's just like you have the two satellites which are noisy, but if they locate you in the same spot, it's actually very high accuracy. And so
Yeah,
if we're
exactly.
approaching it from different areas but we kind of get to the same thing, then I just increase my trust of that. And so I think that's really interesting. And so I think we agree that there's a difference between AI, AB, and maybe AGI, and that it's not there yet, but our biggest risk is to not make it there. And so maybe instead of making AI more intelligent, we should try to make AI more conscious. So
Yeah,
anyways,
exactly.
Krisztian, my friend, always nice chatting with you. Thanks for jumping
Same.
on. Yeah,
Same
looking
here.
forward
It was
to
a
future
pleasure. Thank you
conversations.
for inviting me. I love talking more with you
All right,
anytime.
peace, man.
See
Cheers.
you. Bye.